Maya tried to go about her days as if nothing had happened, but the weight of what she carried refused to loosen its grip. She cooked meals, folded laundry, and answered Daniel's short questions with forced cheer, yet every ordinary moment was stained by the memory of Adrian's calm voice and the choice she had made. She kept telling herself it was over, that she had solved the problem and would never return to that place again. But guilt is not something that leaves when ordered to. It seeped into her gestures, her tone, even the way she breathed when Daniel was near. Daniel began noticing small things without realizing their meaning. Maya had become oddly affectionate, kissing him longer, holding him tighter, offering to make his coffee even when he barely drank it. Instead of bringing them closer, her sudden gestures made the distance more obvious. He would smile politely, mutter a thank you, and bury himself in work calls or emails. Each dismissal cut deeper than before, leaving Maya with the gnawing sense that she had traded loyalty for something that hadn't even given her the comfort she was searching for. Adrian, on the other hand, didn't vanish into the background. He never sent messages that could be traced, never pushed openly, but his presence became sharper whenever they crossed paths. A faint smile, a lingering glance, the kind of look that reminded her of the secret they now shared. He never said the words, but his eyes carried a message he knew, and she could never undo it. That unspoken control unsettled her more than the act itself. She started to avoid common areas, timing her movements so she wouldn't run into him, yet fate seemed to place him in her path whenever her guard was weakest. The true test came when Maya saw Adrian with his wife, Clara, for the first time after everything. They were walking together, casual, comfortable, like a couple who had weathered years side by side. Clara laughed at something he said, and Adrian placed a hand gently on her back as they crossed the parking lot. The image made Maya's stomach twist. Shame burned hotter than ever, not only for betraying Daniel but for being complicit in deceiving another woman who had done nothing to deserve it. The realization hit her harder than any overdue bill. She wasn't just carrying a secret, she was part of a lie bigger than herself. Back at home, Daniel's suspicions finally started to surface. He asked why she seemed distracted, why she kept avoiding his eyes when they spoke. At first, it was casual concern, but as days passed, the questions sharpened. He noticed the times she claimed to be out running errands yet returned with nothing in her hands. He noticed the way she flinched when his phone rang, as if even the sound of a message could unravel her. One evening he confronted her more directly, asking if there was something she wasn't telling him. His voice wasn't angry, just tired, heavy with worry. Maya broke down in tears, but the truth refused to come out in full. She told him part of it, that she had fallen behind on rent, that Adrian had been pressing her, that she had been too ashamed to involve him. She left out the rest, the part that mattered most. Daniel believed her explanation for the moment, but doubt lingered in his eyes. She could feel it whenever he looked at her. Trust, once shaken, never returned in its original form. The silence between her and Adrian grew louder with each passing day. He didn't demand more, not yet, but his very existence was a constant reminder that she was no longer free. She began to live in paranoia, convinced Daniel would uncover the truth or that Adrian would one day push her for another arrangement. Nights became restless, filled with racing thoughts and self-recrimination. She lay beside Daniel, listening to him breathe, and wondered if he would ever forgive her if he knew. More painfully, she wondered if she could ever forgive herself. What unsettled her most wasn't the act itself but how quickly she had accepted it. One desperate decision had rewritten her entire sense of self. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized, someone capable of choices she had once judged in others. That realization cut deeper than the fear of discovery. She had betrayed not only Daniel but the version of herself she had once been proud of. The story didn't end with confrontation or confession. It ended with a quiet understanding that nothing would ever return to the way it had been. Whether Daniel learned the full truth or Adrian demanded more, the damage was already carved into her life. Love, trust, and self-respect had all been fractured, and even in silence, the consequences spoke louder than words. Maya carried on with the motions of everyday life, but inside she knew survival had come at a cost she would never stop paying. That Section 3, minimum 760 words fallout, paranoia, fractured trust, and the emotional aftermath, sharp, faceless, and true to the infidelity short story arc.do. You want me to now create a title plus description optimized for your video format, engaging, curiosity-driven, short enough to hook viewers. My thought time would bury what had happened, that day's turning into weeks would soften the memory and dull the weight of it all, but the opposite became true. The longer she kept silent, the louder the guilt grew inside her. Every time Daniel looked at her, every time he brushed her hand absent-mindedly, she felt the sting of the secret sitting between them. She had convinced herself it was a one-time act, that desperation had forced her hand, but Adrian's shadow lingered over her life as if reminding her that choices never disappear, they follow. Daniel, still unaware of the full truth, began to question her more often. He wasn't accusatory, but his voice carried suspicion, the kind that doesn't need proof to sting. He asked about her sudden late returns, her distracted mood, the unexplained tension she carried like an invisible weight. Maya answered with half-truths, the only kind she could manage without collapsing. The lies slipped out so smoothly it scared her. She had never been someone who lied easily, but now she wove them like second nature, each one stacking over the last until she no longer knew which version of herself she was protecting. Adrian remained silent but present. He didn't demand anything further, didn't corner her with ultimatums, but that calmness became a kind of control. She knew that if he chose to speak, if he ever hinted at their arrangement in front of the wrong person, everything would come crashing down. His restraint was its own power. Maya started avoiding even looking in his direction when she passed him. But she could feel it, his awareness of her, his knowledge of what tied them together. It wasn't words that haunted her, it was the certainty that he could unravel her life whenever he chose. The paranoia seeped into her nights. She dreamt of Daniel discovering the truth, of Adrian knocking on the door when she was unprepared, of Clara, the wife, finding out and exposing her. She woke with a racing heart, drenched in cold sweat, staring into the dark as if the shadows were keeping her secret. Sometimes she imagined confessing to Daniel, ripping the burden out of her chest, but the thought of watching his trust disintegrate in front of her eyes made her stay silent. Silence, she told herself, was its own kind of survival, but silence wasn't peace. Every gesture with Daniel became a reminder of what she had broken. When he leaned in to kiss her, she wondered if he would taste the betrayal she tried to hide. When he spoke casually about the future, about saving for a house or maybe traveling one day, her chest tightened with the realization that she had already destroyed that future without him knowing it. The more he trusted her blindly, the more unbearable it became to carry the truth. One evening, Daniel confronted her again. His tone wasn't angry, but it carried something sharper, resignation. He told her he felt distance between them, that she seemed far away even when she was sitting beside him. He asked if there was something she needed to say. Maya froze, unable to meet his eyes. Tears burned at the corners, but she couldn't bring herself to speak the truth. She simply shook her head and said she was tired, that work and money were weighing on her. Daniel believed her, or at least pretended to, but his silence afterward told her that a part of him doubted. Trust had already begun to fracture, the days turned into a blur of avoidance and pretense. Maya smiled when required, played the part of a partner who cared, but inside she was unraveling. She noticed the subtle changes in Daniel, the way he lingered on her expressions, the way he studied her more carefully. He didn't know, but he sensed. People always sense when something vital has shifted, even if they can't name it. Maya realized then that the real punishment wasn't Daniel discovering the truth. The punishment was living with it, carrying the constant fear, the guilt that poisoned even the moments she still cherished. She had lost the ability to feel clean, to feel whole in her relationship. No amount of affection or pretending could rebuild what had cracked inside her. And worse, Adrian's quiet presence reminded her that the past was never as hidden as she wanted it to be. In the end, nothing exploded, no dramatic revelation shattered their world. The betrayal lived quietly, like a shadow cast over every interaction, a truth unspoken but deeply felt. Maya continued beside Daniel, continued pretending, but deep down she knew they were no longer the same. She wasn't the same. Love had been replaced by doubt, intimacy by secrecy, and survival by a hollow victory that offered no relief. The rent was paid, the roof remained, but the cost had been far greater than money. She had bought time at the expense of trust, and it was a debt. Maya had never thought her life would reach a point where paying rent became an impossible task. Every day she checked her bank balance, hoping for a miracle that never came. Bills piled up on the small dining table, unopened envelopes like silent accusations waiting for her attention. Her job covered just enough for food and transportation, but rent loomed over her like a storm cloud she couldn't escape. She hadn't told Daniel the full truth. He believed she was managing, but the reality was that she was already 2 weeks behind, and Adrian, her landlord, was growing impatient. Daniel worked long hours at the firm, rarely home before midnight. When he did come back, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. Their conversations were clipped, routine check-ins about groceries or his deadlines, never about feelings. Maya used to wait eagerly for him, but now she often wondered if he even noticed her silence anymore. Nights felt lonelier despite not being alone. His presence was physical but not emotional, and the gap between them had turned into something wider than either dared acknowledge. She longed for his support, for him to see how deeply she was struggling, but whenever she tried to raise the topic, his eyes glazed over. He always assumed she had it under control, leaving her to quietly drown. Adrian was different. Not in ways that should matter, but in ways that did when desperation blurred her choices. He was older, calm, always composed when she saw him in the building. At first, his reminders about rent were professional, brief notes slipped under the door or polite knocks with firm words. But this time, his tone carried something else. When Maya finally gathered the courage to meet him, she found herself sitting across from him in his office, fingers trembling as she explained that she needed more time. Adrian leaned back, watching her carefully, the way one studies a puzzle instead of anger or threats. He surprised her with patience. He didn't dismiss her excuses but didn't accept them either. He spoke softly, almost too softly, telling her he understood how difficult things had become for people her age, how the world seemed harsher now than when he was starting out. His voice was steady, understanding, but it carried an undertone that unsettled her. When he told her he would consider alternatives, she didn't grasp what he meant at first. But then he let the words hang in the air. There are ways to handle rent without money, if you're open to arrangements. The suggestion hit her like a wave she wasn't prepared to swim through. She froze, unsure if she had heard correctly. Part of her wanted to be offended, to leave immediately, to tell Daniel everything. Yet another part of her, the part beaten down by overdue notices and sleepless nights, couldn't help but consider what he was implying. She hated herself for even thinking it. Was she truly that desperate? Or was it the loneliness that made the idea stick longer than it should have? Walking back home afterward, her chest was tight with conflicting emotions. She replayed Adrian's words again and again, each time her stomach twisting. She thought about Daniel, how distant he had become, how she couldn't even rely on him to notice her breaking apart. Would he understand her situation if she told him? Or would he dismiss it the way he dismissed everything else lately? She wasn't sure anymore. The more she imagined his indifferent tone, the less she believed in his support. That night, as Daniel came home late once again, brushing past her with a weary smile before collapsing into bed, Maya sat alone in the living room staring at the darkened ceiling. She remembered Adrian's steady gaze, the way his words slid between what was said and what was suggested. The offer was wrong, she knew that. But wrong had begun to feel like the only option left. She couldn't escape the thought that maybe Adrian had seen something Daniel no longer did, a woman pressed against a wall, unseen and unheard, yet still wanting to be noticed. The choice wasn't made, not yet, but the seed was planted. And in the silence of that apartment, with Daniel snoring softly in the other room, Maya realized the most dangerous part wasn't Adrian's offer. It was the fact that she didn't reject it immediately. The thought remained, clinging like a secret she already carried in her heart. That's section 1, 760 plus words, clear, tight, emotional, and designed for narration without filler or scene headings. Want me to continue with section 2, 760 words, the act and escalation, in the same sharp, faceless style. Maya woke up the next morning with the weight of Adrian's words pressing against her chest. She tried to shake them away, but the silence in her apartment only made them louder. Daniel had left early for work, leaving a cold mug of coffee on the counter as proof he had been there. She stared at it for a long time, wondering how two people could share a home and yet live in separate worlds. She needed him to ask, to notice, to care enough to dig deeper into her struggles, but he never did. He had no idea how far behind she was or how close she stood to losing everything. She felt invisible in her own relationship, and invisibility made temptation harder to resist. All day she carried the thought of Adrian's offer with her. It sat at the back of her mind while she worked, while she answered phone calls, while she pretended to laugh with coworkers. The memory of his steady voice lingered, calm, direct, suggesting she had an escape if she wanted it. Each time she thought of refusing, she saw her unopened bills waiting for her at home. She told herself it wasn't about desire but survival, and the more she repeated it, the more it began to sound reasonable. That evening, when Daniel finally called, their conversation was as short as always. He asked if she had eaten. She said yes. He mentioned he'd be home late. That was all. The silence afterward felt heavier than the words spoken. Maya thought of telling him everything, how close she was to eviction, how Adrian had cornered her with a suggestion she couldn't erase, but she didn't. She knew he would brush it off or worse, accuse her of exaggerating. A small voice whispered inside her, if he truly cared, you wouldn't be considering this point 2 days later. Another reminder from Adrian arrived. No threats, just a brief note, still waiting. It was enough to push her over the edge. She found herself walking toward his office again, every step a battle between conscience and desperation. When Adrian saw her at his door, he didn't act surprised. He welcomed her in with a calm smile, as though he had been expecting her. She tried to speak about repayment plans, but the words tangled. He cut through her excuses with the same steady tone as before, reminding her she had choices, reminding her he wasn't asking, just offering. Maya felt her defenses crumble. She told herself it was only once, that no one would ever know, that it would solve the immediate problem. Adrian didn't press, didn't rush her, he simply let her silence work as consent. When it finally happened, it wasn't drawn out or romanticized. It was quiet, tense, heavy with guilt even as it unfolded. Maya's body moved while her mind screamed, but a darker part of her felt alive, noticed, even desired in a way Daniel hadn't made her feel in months. The moment ended as abruptly as it began. She stood afterward in a haze, adjusting her clothes, unable to look directly at him. Adrian, calm as ever, handed her a glass of water and spoke as if nothing monumental had happened. We understand each other now, he said simply. His words chilled her, not because of what they meant in that moment, but because of what they implied for the future. She left feeling both lighter and heavier at once. The overdue rent no longer haunted her, but something else had taken its place. Shame clung to her skin like a second layer. She replayed Daniel's face in her mind, imagining how he would look if he knew. She told herself it was a one-time solution, a survival decision, not a betrayal of the heart. But deep down she knew the line had been crossed, and crossing it once meant it could be crossed again. That night, when Daniel returned home, she kissed him longer than usual. He seemed surprised, almost uncomfortable with her sudden affection. She wrapped her arms around him as if to erase the memory of what she had done, but his distracted expression only deepened her guilt. He asked no questions, gave no indication of suspicion, and in that lack of awareness, Maya felt more alone than ever. She lay awake beside him, her body still and her thoughts racing. Adrian's face intruded every time she closed her eyes. The more she tried to push it away, the stronger it came back, not because of desire but because of the weight of the secret. For the first time, she realized the danger wasn't just in what had happened, it was in what it might become. Adrian now held a part of her no one else knew, and secrets had a way of demanding more space than she wanted to give. That's section 2, minimum 760 words, focus tightly on escalation, the act, and Maya's internal conflict, direct, faceless, and without repetition. Do you want me to carry on with section 3, 760 words, fallout, paranoia, aftermath, in the same style?